Here's a look at the historic Johnson Farms in Hiram, Ohio. Welcome, zombies. This is going to be a particularly interesting video in my opinion today. We're going to look at the John Johnson Farm, a historic site, nationally registered historic site that kind of might make you think why. So the John Johnson Farm is a historic home and listing on the National Register of Historic Places in Hiram Township. So again, we're in Hiram. Previous videos, by the way, if you're not watching these videos in order, I highly suggest that you do. And the previous video was on Hiram College, which is in Portage County, and basically all the videos up to this point have been all inside of Portage County. So here's another historic site right inside of Portage County, and even right inside of the Hiram Township, which is the same township as that Hiram College. Also the Nelson Ledges. A lot going on here. If you're not caught up, go get caught up and then come back to this one. But another historic location in this seemingly middle of nowhere Ohio country. The home built in 1828, questionable maybe, we'll talk about this as we go through the video, is a significant location in the history of the Latter-day Saint movement. Also, you'd also probably know them as the Mormons, as the home of Joseph Smith and his family from September 1831 to 1832. While Smith lived at the home, it served as the headquarters of the Church of Christ. The Johnson Farm is also significant as the site of the tarring and feathering of Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon in March 1832. They were just basically, a mob came, grabbed them, tarred them, like hot tar, threw it onto their bodies, throw feathers on top of it. Makes it extremely difficult to get it off your body. You have to basically just tear your skin off to get it off, and so that's what they did to these two dudes. The Smiths returned to Kirtland in 1832, and the Johnsons moved to Kirtland the following year, and I'll show you Kirtland in just a second. There's also a John Johnson Inn there, like a small hotel, and then also another building that is on the historic registry as well. So we'll talk about that in a second. So originally, John and Mary Elsa Johnson came to Hiram with 10 children in 1818 and bought 100 acres. So, but 100 acres back then, you could buy more land with your money back then, but also you had, that's well off. Like, to buy 100 acres of land back then in this part of Ohio, you had to have some money. And of course, they lived in a log cabin while there were already amazing buildings being put up, but log cabin, we're going with that. And then just a little bit more about the tarring and feathering. The mob, so it says the mob grabbed him, and then the mob choked him, tried to put acid in his mouth, and tarred and feathered him. So I think it was basically just an assassination attempt that somehow he was able to survive. And one of him and his wife's babies also died in the event. And anyways, we'll talk more about why that occurred a little bit later in the video. And when you pull up the Hiram Township, Portage County, Ohio page, there's not much here. It's one of 18 townships in Portage County, but it does here mention the John Johnson Farm. It doesn't even mention the Hiram College, just mentions the farm. And then also interestingly, it mentions that the township was named after Hiram the First, a biblical king. So let's take a little ride in one of my blimps now and show you a couple things from an aerial view. So here's where we're at, historic Johnson Inn right there, which is right outside of Manaway and Hiram. Right here we've got Cleveland, just for reference, and then the other city we'll look at in just a little bit is right in this area called Kirtland. So there's obviously a lot more to this story, but I'll summarize it and just give you the bullet points. Joseph Smith was living in New York, started this church, and people were super against it. And so he, to the point where they were like attacking him and wanted to kill him and stuff like that. So he then fled to Ohio, and same stuff happened there. Tarred, feathered, people wanted to kill him. So then he fled from there to Missouri, and then same thing there happened. And also in Missouri, there was at one point an extermination order by the actual government, the governor there, extermination order to exterminate all Mormons in that state. And so then fled again to Illinois for a little bit, just across the Mississippi River. And shortly, not too long after being there, so they, at that point, they built that city to, it rivaled Chicago at the time. So let's have a little look at Chicago. This is an image right here from 1834. And you can see that there's a lot of buildings. There's some pretty impressive ships on the water right here. And it looks like stuff's pretty built out already in 1834. And the date that I found on this one is 1853. And you can see, again, very built out. And we can't quite tell the height on these buildings, but we can kind of get an idea. So, you know, like this building right here is obviously much larger than these other ones. We've got this one over here, which is obviously much larger. It's got a tower, steeple. You know, that one right there is a bigger structure. So there obviously already there's already a full city built out here with very big structures. Like these couple back here, those are pretty big. And this 1853 and 1834 don't really look different at all. It looks like 1834, what we're seeing in 1853 was already there. And this right here is a cemetery entrance, or as I like to say, this is the tippity top of an old castle, and it was built in 1859. But that's not really anything compared to what we're about to take a look at now, which is called the Columbia World Exposition, which was held in Chicago and is also known as the White City. So I guess let's just start here with this one. This is an ad from a railroad company, the Wabash Line via Detroit to Chicago, saying to grab your tickets and head to the World Fair, this World Columbian Exposition held in Chicago. And here's a look at it. Now, the pictures that I showed earlier from like 1830s, I don't think we're seeing this section in there. I think this was here, but I think the shot we're seeing from those earlier photos is maybe over here in this area. Because to have built this in that time period, in the amount of time with the technologies, and like just, no. And I'll share a couple other things as we go here to kind of back up what I'm saying, but you can also see the list of the buildings here. This is 35 different buildings. I mean, they've got like full man-made peninsula islands right here, and then they've got the just insane buildings sitting on top of them. 35 different total features, and just, man, wait till we get into this. Here's a look at an official souvenir postcard kind of a thing, I guess, something like that. But you can see it's got an image of the building right here. Here's an actual black and white photograph of it. I mean, this is impressive for right now, but back then, and for just a fair, like nothing exists here, we're gonna pop up a little fair and then we'll close it down because it didn't make enough money. This. Here's a black and white of one section of it, and I'll zoom in on this, but this is just bonkers. Absolutely unreal, old world, leftover palace kingdom here. Got the statues, the pillars, the ancient water structures, and how they built with waters and fountains. This is all of it. I don't think the pictures are doing it justice. I mean, you see the little people down here, but even just looking at pictures of this is what the country looked like at one point, or at least several places, different locations throughout the countries, coast to coast, because they had these same type of expos and fairs where they showed off these cities that were magically built like that and then demolished quickly after, all over the country. And here's a look at it in color. Very impressive. And yeah, lighting going on. They introduced a lot of the things in these fairs in general. Like I'm saying, I'll do a video later on more in depth on just the fair, like the number of fairs and the different ones in general. But they introduced a lot of new things, a lot of new technologies, a lot of new products, a lot of, mainly, and I'll get into this in a second, ideas. They introduced ideas and perspectives, and really in these places taught people like what to think about, what to care about, all that sort of stuff. But wow, this is just absolutely crazy. And then yeah, I'm obviously suggesting there's been a very significant rewriting and cover-up of what this actually was, where these actually came from. And then obviously that had already started to happen at this point, because these people are arriving to this stuff, and they're being advertised to it and marketed, and I'll tell you more about that. But people weren't interested in this stuff at first. It had like marketers, advertisers, PR people had to really pitch it and get people to actually start to come to these. And I had no idea that this is where they were born, where it was first revealed. But the Ferris wheel was what did it. There was a fair like this that was launched in Paris, and the Eiffel Tower was displayed, and basically through newspapers and media and all that, they got America to kind of like get jealous and be like, ooh, we got to show some stuff off. And that's how they got people in coming to see this fair. And then in the fair is where they introduce all these new ideas and new things to them. But this Ferris wheel was like the thing that caught people's attention, and it went around in a circle, and it had what they called cars, these that you sit in, and they're supposedly big. Here's another really cool look at it. And again, this is just one, I believe this is like the center section of it all, but there's a lot more outside of this on the exterior. Like you don't even see the Ferris wheel in the shot, and that was one of the biggest parts of this whole expo. So just wow, right? Absolutely insane. They originally started trying to say Christopher Columbus, America, New World, and that was like the pitch to get people to come to it, but it didn't really work super great. So they started to try other stuff, and then the Ferris wheel caught on, and then they did some other things and finally got it to catch on. But originally the whole idea was it to be an anniversary of Christopher Columbus discovering this new world. The exposition covered 690 acres featuring nearly 200 new but deliberately temporary buildings of predominantly, did you catch that? 690 acres, 200 new buildings, but just all temporary. Does it look temporary? Come on. More than 27 million people attended the expo in its six month run. And as you can see here, it gives you quite a bit of information to read up on it. This is a really interesting one. I would honestly recommend just throw it into Google, DuckDuckGo, and just open up and read everything you can find. You'll read some very odd things, I promise you that. And then also right here, so we've got the bidding. So that's originally there was like, the gov was like, all right, here's, we're going to give people money for a fair or whatever. Money was a very big thing attached to this, obviously, like took money to advertise it, but they obviously wanted to make a bunch of money off of it. So anyways, there was a bid, and it was awarded to Chicago in 1890. And then they had to rush to build 200 new buildings on the 690 acres and make them just massive and huge and look perfectly like the old world, stuff that we couldn't even think of. It would be so hard to build that stuff now, but they did it then. And also horse and buggy, talk a little bit more about that later. And it was open in 93. So within 3 years, from dirt and swamp to those pictures. And then inside of this whole area, there's an area called the White City. And the White City was Chicago's first, amusement park. And here's a little look at the White City. You can see very, very, very impressive. Here's another look at a castle inside of the White City. And yeah, those are all people down there. It just looks like a bunch of ants piled up. These buildings are massive. And sadly, this picture is pretty blurry. I can't zoom into it very well. I mean, that's not bad. It could definitely be a lot better, but just another amazing look. And to me, like I've explained in all my previous videos, this looks like old, extremely very well built ancient buildings that could just sit here for thousands of years maybe, and it looks like they've been sitting here a long time. And you got dirt and water, and I think people showed up. I think someone laid claim, started to excavate it, figured we could bring people here as like an attraction, and basically start to brainwash them, teach them, and introduce things to them that we want to. I mean, it's dirt roads. You're not building all this on dirt roads. Even if it's all out of lumber, which it's not, you're not doing 200 new buildings in 3. People can't even get a house built in 3 years out of lumber oftentimes. Yet they did it in 1890s with horse and buggy and did 200 buildings that look like this. They are massive. And then I found this one, and I don't know. They said that it was taken in 1920, which maybe disaster had wiped through and everything. But to me, this looks maybe like one of a much earlier picture of it when it was found. You know, it had been sitting there, left over, beaten up for many, many years. And I think maybe this is what it looked like when we discovered it. And the 3 years spent constructing everything, maybe that's a reasonable time to polish and repair everything. But even then, that big fat maybe on that one. Okay, and then I found this where we get to read it straight from their mouth. We got the 1800 Library of Congress stamp on here. A complete history of the enterprise, a full description of the buildings and exhibits in all departments, and a short account of previous expositions with an introduction. So this is the official, as it can get, what's the story about this exposition. And the first line in the introduction: when the gates of the World's Columbian Exposition have been finally closed, when this thing's over, it will be time enough to impress its lessons upon the world. So when it's over, then we can impress upon the world what we want to. When it's over, then we can teach everybody the lessons that are the reason why we're doing this whole thing. To attempt to do so now would be premature and perhaps misleading. We don't want to waste our time on that now. Let's do it when it's effective. But since its glories have been unveiled to the public gaze, and its success has been assured, it is well enough to review the successive steps to which have led to that success, and to present in a comprehensive way some of the features which will make it ever memorable in the annals of international expositions. So this is an effort by government to make America more international, because America was just kind of doing its thing, self-sufficient. But if there's conquerors that want to have the whole world under their control, that doesn't really work. So you got to figure out how to convince them to not be so self-sufficient. And so this was one of those efforts, and it clicked. It worked. The Ferris wheel, the World Fair, the introduction of new products, technologies, and ideas. But don't do it too quickly. We're going to show them we're going to unveil the glories. Let that sit there for a second. Once we close that up, wrap it up, then it's time to impress these lessons upon the whole world. And so I'll skip over it for now, but it basically just goes through and mentions a bunch of different countries, the powerful countries, and how they're all united to make these world fairs happen, and are donating money and all that. Right here, it is scarcely necessary to name in turn each of the countries contributing to the vastest of world's fairs, this Columbian World Fair. Suffice it to say that all the considerable nations of the earth are here. It is now generally known that there are 13 of these conducted by chiefs of eminent ability, whose representatives have ransacked the world for the treasures of art, science, and industry for the benefit of the exposition. And this is where it talks about the subtler intellectual and spiritual outcome of these world fairs. It must include the stimulating influences born of the commingling of all races of men. And just another interesting tidbit of information: since these buildings were so massive and they built hundreds of them, they set the record for the largest load of logs ever hauled out of the woods by horse. And here's an actual picture of it. It supposedly weighed 144 tons, and 2 horses pulled it. Consisted of 36,000 feet of virgin Michigan pine. The logs averaged 18 feet in length. The height of the load was 33 feet and 3 inches. The weight was 144 tons. This load was decked by a chain and a team of horses. This is a historic photograph of it. That doesn't look like a team of horses. And it was hauled by a team on iced roads, then rafted to the nearest railroad, where it was unloaded onto 9 flat cars and then shipped to Chicago Fair. As many as 40 million feet of logs were taken out of the woods by one outfit in one season. And they did all that to build all that in 3 years. Yo, first of all, that stuff's not wood. That's not lumber structure. And even if it was, they didn't haul enough lumber with horse and buggy to throw all that up in 3 years and still never throw down an actual road. just still leave it dirt? And honestly, this expo got me so curious about things. It answered some questions that I have about that time period, but also introduced some new questions. So anyways, my interest peaked, and I grabbed a book to read a little bit more about it, and I want to share a couple things from that book. And so like I said, at first, people that didn't catch on, they were having a hard time getting people interested in it. And so here's one of the first things they figured out, because so far the Exposition's publicity office had given the press a detailed list of monumental but dreary statistics. So they gave like dimensions of buildings and different stats and numbers, and it was boring for people. And so Bloom, who we're just gonna say PR guy, media guy, which is a huge deal, by the way, and this is why, because there's this something that some conquerors are trying to pull off, but they got to get the public to do it and be interested in it, and it's the messaging in between that makes that happen, and the statistics and numbers didn't work, so they're trying a different approach. And Bloom goes, I could tell they weren't in the least interested in the number of acres or tons of steel. So I said, look at it this way. It's going to be big enough to hold the entire standing army of Russia. Wow, that just paints a really vivid image in your head, doesn't it? But then here's the interesting part. Bloom had no idea whether Russia even had a standing army, let alone how many soldiers it might include and how many square feet. That's advertising. That's marketing. We fall for it now. We started to fall for it right back then. It's kind of looking like we probably never should have, because we should have just probably figured out what those buildings actually were, who actually built them, where they actually came from. But it looks like we got distracted with a Ferris wheel ride, which, by the way, the dimensions of the Ferris wheel, it carries 36 cars, each about the size of a Pullman, which if you look right here, this is a 1920 Pullman car. It's like a piece of a train, like a train car, each holding 60 people. I said 12, 60 people, and equipped with its own lunch counter, and how when filled to capacity, the wheel would propel 2,160 people at a time 300 feet into the sky over Jackson Park, a bit higher than the crown of the now 60-year-old Statue of Liberty. Statue of Liberty is another one where that's just way older. It's the same type of architecture and people and old civilization. And then here's more of what I mean by when they started to introduce things to people. And I think they started to do it with just the messaging and advertising, trying to get people to it, but then at it is where they really started to implant the lessons on people, as they would like to put it. But within the fair's buildings, visitors encountered devices and concepts new to them and new to the world. So again, I've said this before, but I think the conquerors laid claim on a bunch of stuff and probably had, because of that, different technologies and just different stuff, designs, products, or whatever. And the common person didn't know any of that, so they started to introduce a lot of that to people, so that people would start to want to buy that stuff, so that the conquerors could start to make money. They heard live music played by an orchestra in New York and transmitted to the fair by long-distance telephone. They saw the first moving pictures on Edison's kinetoscope, and they watched, stunned, as lightning chattered from Nikola Tesla's body. They saw the first zipper, the first ever all-electric kitchen, which included an automatic dishwasher and a box purporting to contain everything a cook would need to make pancakes under the brand name Aunt Jemima's. They sampled a new oddly flavored gum called Juicy Fruit and caramel-coated popcorn called Cracker Jack. A new cereal, shredded wheat, seemed unlikely to succeed. Shredded doormat, some called it, but a new beer did well. And then later on they say that we know that the shredded wheat did actually hang around. So I think what it's kind of looking like here is what they've done is they've convinced people to come to this fair, and then in the fair they're convincing people to just start to buy stuff. And I guess the people visiting are just so distracted and have probably been told a different story, but are just distracted by the stuff and the fun and the toys, and are not going, who built this? Where'd all this stuff come from? Maybe they were way too trusting of the conquerors that were handing them fun toys to play with, kind of like maybe we could be right now. And with that said, let's take a little look at who had something to do with it. The fair had a powerful and lasting impact on the nation's psyche, and I believe that is ultimately really the only thing that they were going for. Get the money as well while you're at it, but Walt Disney's father, Elias, helped build the White City. Walt's Magic Kingdom may well be a descendant. Certainly the fair made a powerful impression on the Disney family. And all these years later, we're still Disney, Disney, Disney. And what does Disney like to do from the very earliest age possible? Start to put pictures and images and stories into babies, little children's, all the way up through adulthood's heads, implant lessons. But yeah, and then I wanted to mention water real quickly, because I've talked about it previously, that like if civilizations back then were putting up these crazy buildings and we're told like, oh, they didn't have bathrooms, they had to use outhouses, whatever, that doesn't make sense to me. If they're building like that, they absolutely knew how to manage water. And we can start to see that here. And you saw some of the pictures, like there's water out front and fountains. And this is a really interesting read right here. It says that there was a water sterilization plant on the fairgrounds that pumped water through a succession of large tanks in which the water was aerated and boiled. Another word for that is distilling water, and then also aeration, which basically means that water interacts with oxygen, is able to absorb more oxygen. There's more oxygen in the water, which, if fish, for example, breathe oxygen, there needs to be oxygen in their water. So water is healthier when it's more oxygenated, more aerated. And so there's a full system here of ponds and waterways, and where water is passing through tanks, very large quantities of water passing through tanks that are both aerating and boiling the water, both removing all the impurities from the water and introducing into it great levels of oxygen, making very healthy, clean, pure water that's just sitting there. And it's really fascinating, but one way you can aerate water is through fountains. Ancient architecture, and in the stuff we're seeing, what they're saying is not ancient architecture, but is clearly ancient architecture. Fountains, they had whole water systems for purifying their water, not just getting the bad stuff out of it, but putting the good stuff into it, like oxygen. And they did that through different chambers and tanks, and then they also pushed it up through fountains, and the water spraying, and that pressure and that movement into the air oxygenates it, but then also landing on the water oxygenates it, aerates it. And then also when it's open water, any wind that comes through hitting the top of it also sends oxygen into the water. So it's a really amazing way of providing pure, clean, aerated, oxygenated. I think another way they say that is ionize, like ionizing your water, making sure it has like it's charged well, pH balance, making sure it's balanced. Like I think it's all there. Like they had the full systems of just having amazing amounts of extremely healthy water. In the White City of the Fair, visitors found clean public bathrooms, pure water, an ambulance service, electric street lights, and a sewage processing system that yielded acres of manure for farmers. So there's not only just clean water for people living here in this city, this palace kingdom, but then also part of the water systems that were there was to flush out the manure to the surrounding farm areas, so where they would grow all their crop and everything to be able to feed themselves. So like, this is legit. This is like how we should I mean, man, amazing. Now that's Chicago, Illinois, pretty much the same time as when the Mormons built up Nauvoo, and Nauvoo was said to have rivaled Chicago. Now, 1840s is when Nauvoo happened, and that's like the earliest we were able to see of Chicago, but we would see that there was city thrown up there already. Again, this 1890s exposition stuff, clearly those are buildings that were already there. I mean, there's no way they threw that up, and the story doesn't make sense. And so that's what this place looked like. And if you look at this picture from Buffalo, New York, that's where everything first started, and then they moved to Ohio and then to Illinois. Like, this is what America looked like back then. These were the buildings and architecture that were sitting around. This is like the type of water technology that was already around back then. But for some reason, the common people, I don't know, were duped into just going to these places as a fair where they're just told and taught to buy all these new products and stuff, and basically become much more accustomed to international stuff and international affairs and moving international, which basically is just the one world order, new world government. It's just all making everything under one government. And America was a problem, and still is a little bit right now for that, but it's been a push to slowly move American people towards that, and man, they've been accomplishing it. If that was what existed just a little over 100 years ago, and that stuff had been sitting here for hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. Absolutely crazy. And these are some of the exact same cities and places in the same time periods that the Mormons are settling and populating cities that are rivaling these biggest ones that we're looking at right now. So John Johnson Farm, for example, I have to conclude that it was something bigger. Kirtland, something bigger. All of this area, all of like Castle Kingdom, all of America, everywhere. The pictures are there, like we can go look at this stuff. But just the story we've been told, the lessons that have been implanted on us are no log cabins, cowboy Indian, poor, no one's ever been here before. Everything that you see or in pictures was built in the late 1800s. So like it just, the narrative fails. They finally were able to actually kill Joseph Smith. And once he was killed, then there was quite a bit of conflict over, who's in charge of the church, what does the church do at this point, and that's when you get the story of Brigham Young taking some of these Mormons out to Utah, which at the time wasn't part of the United States, but then not too long after that becomes part of the United States, and Brigham Young becomes governor of that state. And you see all this same, even more so, like I haven't touched on Utah a whole lot yet, maybe a couple pictures here and there, but the type of buildings and everything, like, wow, Utah is crazy. I can't wait to make some videos on that. But yeah, so that's the story here. And it's very interlaced, very interwoven with this early American time period and these early American locations. And then this church, this religion became like the main pioneers that went out and settled all the West and what became all the Western United States of America. So it's like, there's a lot going on here, and I don't think it's a mistake that there's so little information and such mystery wrapped around it all. I think the conquerors, the people that laid claim on everything, that started distributing these lands and properties out to people, I think they were doing and have done their job, their thing to just not really let people know what the real story is. So here's the John Johnson Farm. Got the parking lot right here, the main house and the barn right here, and then right over here you've got a church, and I'll show you some footage and pictures of that. And then right here's a little house, and then you've got all the farm right here, 100 acres of it. And I would say that, I don't know, a lot of this is, I'll show you, it's buried. There's been floods and fires through here, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was all, again, one structure we're seeing here, that this church over here is an older buried structure. Same with this actual farm structure over here. And what we're seeing is just kind of the top leftover pieces of it. And here's a map that shows you what I was just saying. So since the Mormons' lives were being threatened, they had to keep bouncing from place to place. It started in New York, then they went to Kirtland, Ohio. And then they shot from there down to number 3 here, Independence, Missouri. And then that's when the governor made that extermination order. Then they went to Illinois. And that's where Joseph Smith was murdered. And then that's where there's the conflict over the church and all that. But then Brigham Young grabs people, and they head out to Utah, and they go settle Western territory. So here's a look at what they call the home on the property. So you've got the home, and then you can see kind of back there in the right is you got the barn and the silo. I'll talk more about that in a second. But yeah, here's a look at the front, and I'll show you a couple pictures real fast. The home has looked a little bit different at different times. They've dressed it and undressed it and redressed it a few different times, it looks like. This one right here I thought was particularly interesting. I can't quite tell. It looks like that might be brick there underneath, but really hard to tell. It just could be red paint or something else. But I mean, again, like we've seen on all the other buildings we're looking at, it looks like something right here has been stripped off, and paneling's definitely been thrown over whatever's here. Here's another look at it from an earlier time, and again, hard to tell what's underneath there, but I want to say it's brick or rubble stone or something like that. It's even got some sort of little terrace here up top. And so you can see that the home has changed several times over the years, but this woodwork inside of here is really insane. That's some really, really gorgeous, impressive woodwork. And also the brickwork right here, the fireplace. And then here's a look at it from the side. So this is it's a big build. Even by like right now standards, this is still a big home. But as usual, I'm saying it's buried. And I'm saying a lot of this is buried. I'm saying this, whatever this whole Johnson farm was back in the early 1800s was probably something like these other buildings that we see in the early 1800s in this area. So here now we're behind the house looking at the side of the barn, and big barn, I guess it would be if it's a 100-acre farm, but to me it just looks like a really solid rock structure, and that tower thing to me looks like it could be a big tower from an old castle. And there's proof of old castles in this area in the time period would make perfect sense to me. I don't see why not. I think it's completely reasonable. But it's just been made to look like, oh, this is just a barn and that's just a grain silo or whatever. I don't know what they say they use it for. And then, yeah, interesting, you've got this church right across the street. And I'll show you some more shots of that in a second, but it just seems to be buried as well. So I think, like I mentioned, this whole area here, we could just be looking at the tops of leftover structures. Daryl, for some reason, was loving chomping on this grass right by this rock foundation right here with the paneling just slapped over it. I mean, they've even sprayed the rock red in some parts of it. Like, they're just really trying to cover everything up. And to me, again, this just looks like we've got a buried building back here, like mud and water flowed through, eventually stopped and stuck, and we got new land that settled right here, looking like this and looking like this, just surrounding and burying so much of the building. At least a few other little buildings on the property. I'm not sure what they are. Again, I don't mean to be super repetitive, but I think this, like, look, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like that's 6 buildings, I think, just right here. 6 different buildings. Like, I think we're just dealing with stuff still poking up, and they've just slapped siding over the top of it all, and they're calling it all different buildings. And so here's a shot of where we were just at. So over here is where I was taking pictures of the front of the home right here. And you can see the home continues back right here. There was this little home right here sitting right in between the 2 properties with this piece of old brick rock sticking up with this design on it and like 2 little cement pyramid things on top of it. I mean, I think that's been sitting there as long as these other buildings we're looking at. And I think this is just someone's home here still that they just haven't wanted to sell. But that's, I don't know, that's pretty cool looking right there. And so, like I mentioned, the John Johnson farm is very much attached to Kirtland and Joseph Smith bringing the Mormon church to Kirtland. And like I mentioned, part of that was because just issues in New York, so I had to flee to Kirtland, but also because there was a building in Kirtland, which is the first Mormon temple. So this is a look at it up here, this building on top of this hill. And when I zoom it out, this building right here is the John Johnson Inn. So what might kind of look like a little hotel, but if we go by everything being buried, this was probably quite a taller building right here. So much more of a hotel looking building. And then here's an early look at the building from up close. And I went and got some pictures of it. I'll show you in a second of how it looks right now and everything. But it's definitely a big impressive building. And the story goes that the Mormons moved to Kirtland and built this building, but it's a building like all these other buildings that we've been looking at that seemed like they'd already been sitting there for a very long time, and that the people showing up with horse and wagon would have probably been incapable of putting something up like that, especially when they were just throwing up log cabins. So this is a look at the interior of one of the earliest pictures we have, and yeah, that's a very impressive interior right there. And that's just like a shot of one corner of it. And like the John Johnson farm, this building has been through several different renovations and has had other things thrown on top of it throughout the years. But when it's stripped, it looks like this: a beautiful, very well built, solid rock structure with very large windows and buried stories. Here's another older look at it. I don't know what the date is on this picture, but It looks like they've got, you know, some wheels on tracks here, so it looks like we're a little bit later on. But again, man, that just looks like a building that's able to withstand Mother Nature and has been sitting there for a long time and is buried, and people showed up on top of the dirt, threw up a little fence. And interestingly, you've probably heard of the Book of Mormon, which was a big part of what Joseph Smith did. Was, so the story is that he found gold plates in a mountain called Hill Cumorah in New York, in Palmyra. Again, that's another like little kingdom. The buildings there are just so insane. And anyways, he found gold plates in a mountain there and translated them, and that's what is the Book of Mormon. And one of the things that the Book of Mormon talks specifically about is that there was an ancient civilization in America that was very prosperous and industrious, and probably would have built buildings just like this and all the other ones we see that are very similar to the types of ancient ruins in the Middle East. And also, part of the story of who that ancient civilization was is a family broke away from the Middle East and sailed to America and established a civilization here. So that would make sense. You know, all this architecture that we see left around here that matches all the Middle Eastern other ancient stuff, Rome and all that. There seems to be a book called the Book of Mormon that talks about something very similar. And the early American history right here in the buildings and migrating to the west, that whole story is interwoven right inside of all of it. And here's another early look at the Kirtland Temple. And the Kirtland Temple, of course, is a National Historic Landmark. I thought this was really interesting. The Kirtland Temple was not originally white on the exterior as it is today. The original, this is something I always wonder, because they mostly all the pictures from back then, I mean, we just see them in black and white, right? So, but I always wonder, like, what were the colors on these buildings? Because if they were building stuff that amazing and that with that much design, like, what kind of colors were they putting on these buildings? It says right here, the original exterior was a bluish gray, according to Truman Coe, a local minister in the 1830s, and the roof is believed to have been red, and the front door is olive green. So that's just like that big building made out of rock, but then red roof with a bluish gray, like actual look of the building, with a red roof and green, olive green doors. Like, that would be, and on top of that hill, like, you would really see that thing from a ways away. So now let's take a look at the Kirtland Temple building as it stands now. As you can see, this is it right here. This is me posing in front of it. It's a big building, and as you can already see right here, it has definitely buried stories, and I would say several stories. And this was really interesting right here. I noticed these two little pillars poking up, like a foot, maybe like a foot and a half or something like that. I don't know, but they were only poking out of the ground a little bit. And they've got these little pyramids, and they looked like old stone. So I was sitting there wondering what they were. And then there was someone there who I asked, and they said that those were old, like, hitching posts for horses. So you like ride up on your horse, throw your rope around it. But those are really short hitching posts. So that didn't really make sense to me. And then also, you've got the doors and the windows just completely blocked right here. But anyways, I'll get back to that in a second. But the size of this building is very impressive. The windows are extremely impressive. Very big, tall glass windows. And again, like I already showed you, this is a completely stone building. Very strong stone building. Very heavy. And they've put plaster or stucco on the outside of it right here, and then on the top section here we've got the white paneling. But you can see right here, these little square squiggly things is that's like a Roman design type of thing. Same with this up here. You can't see, but it's kind of hard to tell in this picture, but it's that green type of dome again. And I don't know exactly what this symbol means, but I have seen it around quite a bit. I should try and figure out what that one means. Here's another picture I found of it where you get to see the actual rock that it's made out of. Very, very cool. So I came around the back side of it, and again, very impressive windows back here. But I noticed that there's newer stone thrown on top to make it look like this is the foundation. But I found these little open rectangles, And so I decided to go take a little peek into these guys right here. Oh, you can actually see in this one, they got the 2 little bars right there. So here's a look into the one with the 2 bars. And you can see right there, that's a window back there. It's just another story of windows buried, going down. And I would imagine that there's actually several more stories going down, but you can clearly see at least one of them right here. And here's a look in another one of the holes where it didn't have the bars on it this time, but clearly another window, maybe even a door. Like that almost looks more like a door to me. I don't know, but clearly there's just way more to this building right here that's covered up and buried.